Good morning and welcome back. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. If there's one thing that Mark Rutte agrees with President Donald Trump on, it's the premise that Greenland must stay off limits for the likes of Russia and China. After having a discussion with POTUS on the sidelines of the Davos Forum, the NATO had emphasized the positive direction the talks have taken. Speaking at the annual Ukraine breakfast panel at the World Economic Forum, Rutte said the talks involved discussions on keeping the Arctic region safe and stressed that further meetings would ensure that the Chinese and the Russians would not gain military or economic access to Greenland. Trump, who had previously threatened to annex the island by force and vowed to impose tariffs on countries that opposed the idea, withdrew his threats on Wednesday, claiming that an outline of a deal on the island's future has been reached. Meanwhile, in Brussels, strengthening bilateral and allied cooperation in high-priority security landscape is at the top of the agenda for the meeting of military chiefs of staff of the NATO alliance. Among the topics being discussed, the High North and Ukraine are key areas of interest. To tell us more about the details of these discussions, we are joined by our defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek, who is keeping her finger on the pulse in Brussels. Good morning, Zuzanna. So what can you tell us about these discussions held by NATO's military chiefs of staff?
Good morning, Claudia. So we know that they actually have no easy task ahead of themselves, particularly as they are forced to respond to the volatile events coming out of Davos. We know, for example, that based on the discussions and based on what we just heard about the Secretary General Mark Rutte's conversation with US President Donald Trump, the security of the Arctic area will dominate some of the discussions today, particularly as the 7 NATO member states in the Arctic region have been called on to strengthen their multilateral cooperation on securing the environment and, as you've mentioned previously, ensuring that China and Russia will never gain a foothold in that region. But at the same time, we have to remember that Greenland and the security of the Arctic region are not the only areas of interest for the NATO alliance. Ukraine remains on top of the agenda, as has been underlined repeatedly both by Rutte in Davos as well as by the military chiefs of staff here in Brussels. So we can expect that today Ukraine, and particularly as it pertains to the strengthening of support for the country through formats akin to the coalition of the willings, will also be on top of the agenda. But it's also important to remember that the NATO alliance faces a plurality of threats, as has been demonstrated over the last year or so, where, for example, Russia's ongoing hybrid warfare against the alliance, particularly its eastern flank, that is Poland, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. We know, for example, that cybersecurity, I've spoken to some officials, some NATO officials on the sidelines of yesterday's discussions and this morning's discussions, and we know that cybersecurity remains a key priority for Poland, for example, which in the last year has experienced a record spike in a number of cyber attacks it has witnessed. It's about 30% rise in January 2026 compared to the previous year. So we know that despite these huge stakes discussions happening around key priority areas such as Greenland, such as Arctic and Ukraine, there are other key areas which the military chiefs of staff will have to address as well. We expect to know all the details, or at least some of the details, later on in the day as the chiefs of staff take to the podium for the joint press conference. That will be Alexis Grinkiewicz, the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, as well as Admiral Cavo Dragoni. So we'll bring you the latest as and when it happens. But for now, it's back to you in the studio.
Zuzanna, just before I let you go, I also wanted to go back to the announcement that was made on Truth social platform by President Trump yesterday, something that we've covered extensively here on TVP World so far. How do you think that this announcement of President Trump striking a deal with Mark Rutte regarding Greenland and the announcement of the tariffs not being imposed from the 1st of February is actually going to impact today's meetings, if at all?
I think it's fair to say that it provides a level of reassurance for these discussions, but I think considering that these discussions primarily focus on strengthening multilateral cooperation, although the conversations happening back in Davos will inevitably have an impact, it's fair to say that contingency planning is already taking place according to plans previously laid out by NATO alliance and people that have parties which have key security interests in the region.
Thank you so much. That was Zuzanna Jurek reporting live from Brussels. And now let's hear from Jim O'Neill, former commercial secretary to the British Treasury, on what he had to say about Europe's relevance in the global economic landscape in relation to the latest transatlantic developments on TVP World's On the Record.
He is assuming that the US economy is completely impervious. I just caught a bit of his comments at Davos, which is clearly wrong. The US depends on the kindness of strangers and massive foreign capital flows into the United States. And the flip side of that is an extremely weak domestic savings ratio. And the United States cannot afford to upset everybody around the world all the time, particularly if it makes investors think this guy is diminishing everything that the US has benefited from this system, which he clearly conveniently often ignores. And we are vulnerable to our safety of investments in the US. And we've seen a bit of a mini rerun of that in the markets the past 36 hours. And if that becomes a bigger repeat of what we saw on so-called Liberation Day last April, I think there'll be a lot of forces inside the United States saying enough of this guy, including possibly in the Republican Party, because all that will do is force the United States into a significant slowdown, probably recession, and accelerate the relative decline of the United States.
But as the eyes of the world were cautiously watching U.S. presidents' every move in fear of possible escalation over Greenland, time has not stopped in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, where hundreds of thousands of residents have already fled the city as the bitter cold and lack of electricity are making life a struggle. Our correspondent in Kyiv, Oskar, has this report.
More than 500,000 people have left Kyiv in recent weeks as Russia's winter bombardment of Ukraine's energy infrastructure has created a humanitarian crisis in the Ukrainian capital. With Ukraine experiencing its coldest winter in decades, Russia has repeatedly sent waves of drones and missiles to target Ukraine's civilian electricity grid, with Ukrainian authorities reporting that all of Ukraine's power plants have been attacked at one point or another since the full-scale invasion. This has led to rolling blackouts across the country, and more than 60% of the Ukrainian capital is currently without power, as the Ukrainian government has declared a state of emergency due to the energy crisis. The situation started reaching a critical point in early January, with Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko taking the unprecedented and controversial step of asking Kyiv residents to temporarily evacuate the city as Russia's bombardment escalated. Now, the mayor says 600,000 people have fled the city.
Before last attack, the population in our hometown was 3.6 million people. 600 people leave the city. Not everyone have a chance to leave the city, but right now the population is reduced.
600 people?
Around 600,000.
With temperatures routinely plunging as low as -15 degrees centigrade, many Ukrainian families are struggling just to heat their homes, as the blackouts have also impacted Ukraine's central heating network and running water. In response, Ukrainian authorities have set up heated tents in major population centres to provide warmth and shelter to civilians impacted by the blackouts. A Polish fundraiser to help Ukrainians dealing with the winter crisis has also received 1.2 million euros worth of donations so far.
This beautiful gestures of Polish citizens feeling sympathy, feeling responsibility towards our Ukrainian neighbors in the times of coldness. If you're lucky, and we are lucky in Poland, you can come back home and it's warm. You can make a warm meal for your children.
President Zelensky says Ukrainian repair crews are working round the clock to repair the damage.
Repair crews and the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, employees of energy companies and municipal services are fully engaged. As of this morning, about 4,000 buildings in Kyiv are still without heat, and nearly 60% of the capital is without electricity. According to reports from city authorities, the resources involved are sufficient, but time is needed. I do not agree with this assessment. Additional measures and additional resources are needed.
But with Ukrainian intelligence agencies warning of further Russian attacks on energy infrastructure this winter, the task of restoring power to these embattled communities may only get harder. I'm Oz Kataji from Kyiv for TVP World.
United States envoy Steve Witkoff will travel to Moscow later on Thursday to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine. And we continue. The European Parliament voted in favor of approving a €90 billion loan from the European Union to Ukraine. The vote passed with 499 votes in favor, 135 against, and 24 abstentions. The loan was agreed at the EU summit in Brussels on December 18, 2025. Since the Czech Republic, Hungary and Slovakia withdrew their support for the loan, the agreement was concluded under the Enhanced Cooperation Procedure, a mechanism enabling interested EU member states to cooperate in specific areas. According to the treaties, the Enhanced Cooperation Procedure requires a consent of the European Parliament. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the funds will be used to purchase equipment primarily from Ukraine and the European Union. If it's not possible to purchase equipment from Europe, arms from outside the European Union and outside the region would be purchased, according to von der Leyen. This means the EU is aiming to avoid purchasing American equipment. Poland's booming economy and rising prominence in Europe are reversing a trend that once painted Poles as migrants searching for work and prosperity. Official statistics show that thousands are now returning home.
After emigrating en masse in the years after their country joined the European Union, Poles are now coming back home. The Netherlands, a popular destination for Polish immigrants in years past, is the latest country to record more Poles leaving than entering. In the first 9 months of last year, 490 more Polish citizens left the Netherlands than entered, the first such instance since Poland joined the EU more than 2 decades ago. By comparison, as recently as 2024, more Poles were moving into the Netherlands than returning home, according to figures published by the Dutch Statistical Office. Shortly after Poland entered the EU in 2004, hundreds of thousands of the country's citizens left in pursuit of jobs and higher pay in wealthier EU member states like the United Kingdom and Germany.
In the year 2004, when Poland had joined the EU, the unemployment rate in Poland was more than 20%. At that time, the average salary in the United Kingdom was some 8 times bigger than Poland.
But in recent years, this trend has drastically slowed and even reversed in countries like Germany, where close to 9,000 Poles left to return home in 2024. And in the UK, roughly 25,000 Poles have left each year for the past 5 years. The reasons behind this reversal are economic. Wages in Poland have risen drastically, the job market is robust, and economic growth has consistently outpaced that of Western Europe. Adjusted for the cost of living, Poland's gross domestic product per person reached 83% of the EU average in 2024, the latest year for which data is available, compared to less than half of that average in 2004. And at current growth rates, Poland could soon be on track to surpass the UK and other Western European economies in this metric.
According to some forecasts, in 5 years' time, we can match the British level of GDP per capita. We can surpass Spain, approach Italy, maybe surpass Italy in a couple of years.
With a robust economy and rising wages, returning home is becoming an increasingly attractive proposition for many Poles that had emigrated abroad. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
And so this would be all for now. Thank you so much for joining me for a portion of the latest news, and I hope to see you back on top of every hour for more.